special theory of some adumbrations of some difficulties resulting tangentially from Zizek's view of the situation in quantum physics, and thereby also the situation with respect to some kind of primitive view of reality, which is to say something independent of human beings, both in the sense of our sensorium and in the sense of what we can reach through mathematical reasoning. I point people to the Zizek's most apex statement, as I take it to be, although it's been a few days, so maybe he's had some new wrinkles already. But I think it's called the Crisis and Critique podcast. I watch on YouTube. It might be available elsewhere. It was about the YouTube thing says 5 days ago, and there he gives account of his a short crazy version of his view, and at the end he goes into a long consideration on some assistant of apparently Stephen Hawking, who has a view that is basically some form of the Charles Sanders Peirce view, that Peirce view that the atoms can learn, that there's some kind of therefore that there's some kind of atoms, or whatever is in the genuine place of atoms, the smallest things can learn, and therefore there's some kind of evolution of the laws of what comes forth of its own, or in other words, what we call they would no longer be laws, but they would just be the behavior of the things that come forward by themselves. Because law suggests some kind of regularity. The point I want to bring out is not mentioned anywhere else except here, so far as I know. It's very simple, so probably some other people have thought of it, and maybe it's been developed somewhere else. But if you start, so as Zizek does and as everyone does, as this Nobel Prize is 2022, and I don't want to go at this point into a long thing of why I think. I'll just say in one sentence that this guy Bell came along. He said he made an interpretation of Einstein's paper on the measurement of physical reality. It's his interpretation. It's not Einstein's, but we act as though we attribute Bell's views to Einstein, and Bell has sort of displaced Einstein's own views. And that's the popular version that we're always hearing about, is really Bell's Einstein rather than Einstein's own version. Bell didn't have a discussion with Einstein and work it out with him, but rather he read this description of physical reality paper from 1911, popularized it under his interpretation, and then that continues to the present day. I think so. I want to say something how I understand what Einstein's problem was. In contradistinction to what the current account, is that Einstein didn't believe in this thing he didn't believe in Schrodinger's equation or Max Born's version of the equation because it was probabilistic, and he thought that this meant there were the so-called hidden variables were waiting to be found, and then it would be worked out. But what I would say is what Einstein thought is that if you have a probability distribution, so it's simply a mathematical, it's simply mathematical thinking. So like if I think of infinity mathematically, that doesn't imply that I have to have experienced infinity, which actually I couldn't. In life, empirically, or in life, same thing. Or in an experiment, same thing. Experimentally, in life, empirically, I didn't fly to infinity, but I can think without doing anything of infinity, and then I can kind of put an image to it. And at the same time, I could say with numbers, it just goes on. You have some large number, 10 to the 563rd power, plus 1, plus 2, plus 3, infinity, to infinity. So we all kind of, in a way, think we know what infinity says. It's actually very ambiguous whether we understand what infinity means, and whether, in fact, that notion of adding, that additive notion, is at all adequate. That's a long story. The medievals thought about this for more than 1,000 years. And there's many things in the theological texts about it. But in any case, the point of Einstein is, if you do things through a probability distribution which allows for what they call, so in all what extreme outliers, let's start with a simple phrase. So not everybody has even heard the word outliers, I realize. So, but for people that are spending a lot of time studying these things that have nothing better to do, let's say, we've all know what an outlier is. It's something the statistics expect in normal cases. So for instance, you get throw a coin, you might get 3 heads in a row or 3 tails in a row, but you don't usually get 57 billion times in a row that there's heads on a normal coin that you can't discern anything is wrong with the coin. It's not weighted wrong, it's just a normal coin, but then it has this extreme outlier thing where it keeps landing on heads, even though there's nothing wrong with the coin. That would be an extreme outlier. So in normal scientific practice, all outliers are at a certain point declared to be, they call it noise or static, and they say there must be something wrong with our probability distribution if we're, the way we're figuring that the coin should have 50-50 must be wrong if we're all the time getting these outliers. So you could adjust your probability distribution expectation according to the outlier and then get rid of the outliers, because then you'll say we ought to expect this result. We ought to expect the 20 billion to the 5th times landing on heads or landing on tails in a row, and then it wouldn't no longer be an outlier, but it would be an expectation. But what Einstein's saying is, if science is impossible if you impose a mathematical rule like that and say, when we have a particle shot, it could be, there's a small outlier chance, so obviously far less than 1% according to the probability expectation or the of the distribution, that it'd be infinitely far away from here. Now, this connects up, I think, in a way. It's tangential, or it's an analog to what Zizek's looking at in terms of his, he mentions Althusser in the thing, and he mentions different ways of understanding the distinction between the spiritual and the physical, the faster than light, or the immediate, or the, faster than light isn't that impressive, right? But instantaneous is more impressive. So say things are instantaneous at an infinite distance. That seems like that he, by metaphor, transfers the meaning of the distinction between spirit and matter to these instantaneous or possible instantaneous transfers. And in the same way, I would say we could make another case where what Einstein's saying is there's something like that with Schrodinger's equations, where it has to assume that there's some kind of small fractional chance that something from the particle reaction that we start with would be at an infinite distance, and then think of space as being infinite. In fact, as I just tried to give us an avenue of invasion and how to catch hold of conviction of the fact that this is a real issue, although some kind of quietism seems to want to creep in here. Of course, obviously, Kant has raised this question in his antinomies, but how can one think of physical space? You're in a spaceship, you're flying, as being literally infinite, or I think Levinas is good here, where he says infinite and indefinite are almost mean the same thing, and Strauss affirms that. Einstein rejects this idea that the pure mind that can conceive of this infinite or indefiniteness and then plug it into an equation, which is a kind of probability expectation, has any sense. He says that this is not the way reality is. So that was his real critique of the quantum mechanics and of the probability, or so it's in simple terms of probabilistic thinking versus calculation, which is exact. So I think already starting, without going into all the problems that I just tried to touch on a little bit with, start to some degree problems of explication, problems of propaganda, and so on, that Einstein has misrepresented, that this guy Bell has taken over, and his version, his interpolation has become reality in the common discussion, and et cetera, which are not, in my view, they're not trivial problems. We're grabbed by the scruff of the neck by this kind of bullshit constantly, and even though it seems relatively easy, it's not at all easy to correct these things, because one, you have to be really sure that you were acutely certain of your own interpretation. You'd have to be able to spell it. You have to find a way to explain it very clearly. You'd have to have the right, probably it would be better, so for instance, if you had the right badges on, if you were in this Christopher Latch sense, an elite with all the right badges, who people believe no matter, even if they're constantly saying things that are false, and even if they constantly admit to saying things that were wrong and to making bad choices, but it's nonetheless we say, oh, but they have the badges, therefore they're the ones best. So far as we want somebody to prophesize for us, we might as well go to them anyway, even though they've got 5,000 things wrong in their whole career. Everything they said is wrong. We might as well still listen to them. So, I mean, there's all kinds of so-called accidental things which come in to even positing these simple things. So it's by no means, it's a powerfully tempestuous thing that these simple problems of, e.g., Bell taking over the interpretation of what Einstein thought by presenting this notion that what Einstein thought is that hidden variables should be a kind of theory equivalent to the theory of Schrodinger or Max Born, and that was Einstein's problem has been solved by this 2022 Nobel Prize theory, which I'm arguing it hasn't, but only Bell's questions have been solved. And also I add, in addition, that what I just said is not complete, but it's only a part of the issue of why Einstein has been misrepresented in the popular, and not only but again, I'd like to quote, Nietzsche here, who says these savants, in giving their accounts to the public, are actually giving accounts to themselves. So, I mean, it's not like Neil deGrasse Tyson actually is a genius and he's just giving simple accounts for the sake of the public. I mean, he doesn't know anything more. That he's just giving an account to himself, and that's the best he can do is talk in the popular language, which is generally the lowest possible language, because just assume that there's some people that are good at mathematical thinking. So myself, for instance, who can actually think, or that lady savant who solved the problem about the Monty Hall problem against all the mathematicians. But why? Because she could think clearly about certain things that are extremely abstract. So most people can't do that. So it's just like some people are, but that doesn't mean she's better than smarter than most people. That's just a stupid way of understanding intelligence, because people are sensitive to different things, right? Some people have a high sensitivity to music. Some people have a high sensitivity to thinking in ways that have not been thematized and don't have a common name that we can talk about. And there's 1,001 such things, such as personality, and Carl Jung is highly sensitive to personality. So this all is very complicated, and I think Zizek, to some degree, even though it's very difficult to constantly make saving clauses and explain this, is too apodictic, too positivistic in his account, and also it's unclear what the underlying assumptions behind his theory that he should be super hysterical about whether well, no, he's not super hysterical, but he puts a lot of weight on whether the current physicists take seriously certain theories. But why can't he present it to himself in a way that he can think it through clearly without them? I don't think it's even necessary. There's no, and in fact, I think in general, there's no places where competency in doing calculations in mathematics really matters, because that would only matter in terms of whether the outcome was predictive or not. It doesn't really matter in terms of how we understand the matter, how we understand what's happening in terms of whether we are talking about reality and what reality means. If reality is said in contradistinction to our sensorium. So, for instance, as I always say, in whether the world is really black and white or whether the world is really in color, for instance, and other such things are the all kinds of similar questions about our sensorium, whether it has direct access, and then all the questions about whether we can infer from certain abstract notions what the concept of reality should mean, as Kant did in his version of phenomenology, which sets the senses against reality as this Cartesian mathematical reality.